Hi, everybody, and welcome to Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today on Attendance Bias, my guest is author Jason Gershuny. Jason is the co-author of the book 100 Things Phish Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. As we discuss in today's episode, Jason's book, which he co-authored with Andy Smith, is an extensive FAQ-style book about Phish, giving bite-sized nuggets of information about the band and the Phish culture. It kind of acts as an extensive primer for new fans, or just a reference book for seasoned and jaded fans like myself. Jason and I were put in touch through a mutual friend, and when I literally read the book, his book that is, I knew I would be speaking with a person who not only had an extensive knowledge of the Phish universe, but also a very deep appreciation for the music and the scene, and that's the kind of guest I love to have on Attendance Bias. Jason chose to discuss Phish's show on August 6, 2017 at Madison Square Garden, which you may recognize as the final show of the historic Baker's Dozen, also known as Glazed Night. There was a lot for Jason and I to talk about. We had similar upbringings in New York City, but also we got very emotional during this closing night at the Garden for very different reasons. So, let's join Jason Gershuny to talk about August 6th, 2017 at Madison Square Garden. Jason, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Of course. And I'm very excited to talk to you, not only about the book you co-authored, 100 Things Phish Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, and of course, to talk about the show that you chose, August 6th, 2017 at Madison Square Garden, which we both know, and anyone who's listening probably knows, was the final show of the Baker's Dozen. You're the first person to choose a show from 2017, and you're the first person to choose a show from the Baker's Dozen. And since it happened, I've just been dying to talk about it and have an in-depth discussion with anyone because I have so much to say, even though you're the guest today. But before we get into that, let's hear a little bit about your background. So, Jason, where are you from originally and where are you from now?
So grew up about a half hour north of New York City in a place, Rockland County. So I would go in, as a kid to the wetlands and Madison Square Garden, and just New York was kind of where I grew up, but lived in the burbs as a kid. And now I live out in Portland, Oregon. I've been out west for about 20 years now.
Wow. So talking about the wetlands, what were some of the shows you've seen there? Because I used to go when I was in high school to the wetlands, and that was when Mo was on their way up, and a couple years after Blues Traveler, but a couple years before the Disco Biscuits, kind of that mid-90s second-tier jam bands were really making themselves known. What were some of the memorable shows you remember from that venue?
I mean, it was countless, like the Dead cover nights. We'd go down there. I would see a lot of Mo shows. I remember Due to Life. I remember Disco Biscuits. I remember just all kinds of that was the heartbeat of New York City and our jam scene. And I think we were just so incredibly lucky to be there at the time we were. I know for me, it really did help form a lot of my thoughts on sort of even the political world. I mean, it was a politically progressive place. The music and the politics and the environment all kind of came together in this one spot. And
for anyone listening who either didn't grow up in the New York area, or perhaps you're a bit young to have engaged with the wetlands or visited, it was, I think, Pete Shapiro's first club, I suppose, or his first music venue that he ran. And it was tiny, right? It was maybe 200 people, like wall to wall at that point, right?
I don't really know the capacity. But it definitely was tiny. There was a downstairs area, which was pretty big as well. So I don't know if they counted those in the numbers. But the dance floor itself was real small. I know there was the VW bus was parked inside by the activism area, which is now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So for anyone that's been there or is curious about it, I think you could still visit that pretty famous bus. I would always dance over there. That was always my zone. So it was always a little flavor of music and activism kind of came together, and the bus, just because there was always a little more dance space there, and it just happened to be where I found myself most comfortable. I mean, that was the spot. Like, if you were looking for the heartbeat of the New York music scene, that was it. And it was, I miss that place a lot, but I feel very lucky and blessed to have been able to, dive in, at that time period.
Yeah, it was a special time and place, and it is kind of a visceral like you said, the heartbeat of the New York music scene. If you were into that kind of music or on your way into that kind of music, it really was the vein of the whole vibe. So speaking of the whole vibe, how did Phish enter your life?
I can think of a couple different ways. I mean, I have like a pretty vivid memory of sitting in my friend's backyard. I think we were in high school, and he sat me down, and I actually remember the exact song. He played me the "You Enjoy Myself" from Stowe, Vermont '92 with Santana.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And he's like, "I just want you to listen to this, and I want you to envision a musical orgasm." and you know, like having not sat down, listening to it, you know, just that peak, and then everything from there, it made sense. It clicked. My cousin, who's a year younger than me, Lauren, I remember her being big into Phish and playing Reba for me, you know, like when we were kids. And I also, summer camp, you know, part of that Northeast summer camp vibe, I do remember people playing different things and sort of just absorbing it as it came. So I'd say some sort of mix of all of those things came together. And really just that kind of, you know, launched me in this direction.
And most of that was in high school, you would guess?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely, you know, a big Grateful Dead tour guy in those early sort of, you know, freedom years when I was first able to go and hit the road, teenager. And, you know, my first Phish show was in 93, and then 94 is really when I started kind of getting it a lot more. And then it was just sort of on from there. But I did see as many Grateful Dead shows as I could, and that was kind of a mix of the two worlds blending together. So
sure. Where was that first show in 93?
Orange County Fairgrounds. So just north of Rockland County is Orange County. If anybody's been to the Woodbury Commons, you've driven through, or Harriman State Park. And it was just like a dusty county fairgrounds, and it was the Horde Tour. And, you know, I remember a neighbor of mine just got a group of folks together, rode up there. It was Phish, Widespread Panic, Blues Traveler, Colonel Bruce. You know, I was just there for all of it. I mean, it was all just going to live music, and that sort of experience with a group of friends was new to me. Phish headlined and came on at midnight, and started things off with a 2001 Split Open and Melt. And like, you know, they just literally walked on stage at midnight or around midnight, and then bam, 2001 Split Open and Melt. So that was definitely one of those life-changing nights for a lot of reasons, opened my eyes to all different kinds of music. But obviously Phish is the one that kind of kept me going. It's stuck around. But I love Panic. I still check out Blues Traveler. You know, Colonel Bruce is definitely near and dear to my heart. So there's still a lot of, you know, musical residue from that moment, but Phish definitely deep in the heart and soul.
Do you remember much about what the scene was like, different from kind of how it is now?
You know, in 94, I do remember a much smaller music scene where, you know, I have a vivid memory of one of my favorite shows is from Onondaga by Syracuse in 94, right after Halloween. And like, we would lift up all the folding chairs and we'd pass them on down to make a little dance space for ourselves. And it was this just small, intimate little scene. And it's been kind of amazing watching it grow from, you know, dusty fairgrounds and small little intimate venues into, you know, giant festivals and, you know, Madison Square Garden, like we're going to talk about. I mean, the musical center of, you know, at least as far as the performing stage world, it's been amazing to watch their growth and just how far they've come. But like the transition from 94 to 95, I remember the show that really kind of stuck to me. I went to Palace at Auburn Hills in 95. That was a huge basketball stadium, and just seeing Phish, I think it was maybe 18,000, 20,000 people at that point. Right before Halloween in 95, it was startling. I couldn't imagine. It was just look at all these people at the show. Now it just kind of has become the norm. But
at
that point, it was a huge jump.
And speaking of that huge jump and their development over several years, your book, co-authored with Andy Smith, kind of covers that pretty much from start to finish, or start to the present of press time when the book was published. I kind of read it as a compilation of every Phish book I've ever read. And I mean that as a compliment because it's so comprehensive and it gives so much information, you know, with more up-to-date information than other books. I'm thinking of the Phish Compendium by Dean Budnick, the Farmer's Almanac, the Phish book with the interviews of the band, Park Puterberg's biography, even the Fishnet FAQ. You guys kind of took the best pieces from it without going too deep, but just kind of giving a primer to anybody. It's very digestible and easy for new fans and experienced fans. So I'm wondering, The book is called, again, 100 Things Phish Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. How did the idea of this book and the generation of it start?
So the publisher is Triumph Books, and they have a whole series of 100 Things to Know, and it's about every fan base. So there's one about every sports team. There's one about the Beatles. There's one about the Avengers and Star Wars and Game of Thrones. And anytime that there's a diehard fan base, there is a book, 100 Things to Know Before You Die. So this is part of the series. I was contacted by one of the folks that work there about putting something together. I'd been doing music journalism for a while, and it just seemed like a good fit. I was then, try to figure out how I was going to pull this off. My daughter was born a little bit before that, working in my normal job. So trying to figure out how I was going to do this. I'm like, I can't take this on my own. And so I reached out to Scott Bernstein, who is, in the Phish scene. People definitely know him from Yemblog and Jambase. And he's somebody that, in my early days of touring, I knew him back in like early college days. We, would see shows together and we're friends, and just reached out to him, and he put me in touch with Andy, who had his own idea for a book where initially I was a little more focusing on the history side of things, and he was focusing a little bit more on the scene itself. So it seemed like a really good mix because we kind of wanted to focus on different aspects, but we got together and we basically came up with a list of 100. We actually probably had a list of 130 and had to trim it on back. And the idea was it's supposed to be, like you were saying, it's supposed to be digestible. It's in our vision, every chapter stands alone. It's not something you need to read start to finish. You could jump in at any point. It's mini essays. It is supposed to kind of cover the bases, but there have been so many books, and that's one of the things that's amazing about the Phish scene. Like, this is the scene of where almost everyone is an expert on some level. Like, there's so much depth of knowledge and so much passion that it's not like we were, reinventing the wheel. We wanted to create something different, but something really digestible. The idea that you could put it on the back of your toilet. 5 minutes later, when you go in, do your business, you read a thing, it brought you back, it brought that joy. That's kind of the idea. We also, the companion is such a deep, detailed, almost like biblical proportion deep dive into Phish that we weren't looking to compete with that. Yeah, we weren't looking to replicate that at all. We just figured we would create something. Maybe if you were relatively new to the scene and all of a sudden you caught on. It caught on to you, but you wanted to know more, just a simple sort of digestible way to kind of dive in. Oh, I heard about that Gamehenge thing, or what's they talk about with that type 1 versus type 2. You'll hear these Phish statements and these common phrases in our culture that you might want to dive deeper into. And so our idea was just to create something that was easily digestible, 100 isolated chunks that you could look at any given time, and that even if you are a longtime fan, you would get something out of it.
Yeah, I felt similarly, and something I really liked about what you and Andy did was all this information is freely available online. And it's almost gotten to a point, in my opinion, where there's almost too much information online to the point where a new fan almost gets paralyzed, where they don't know where to begin. And this book really does center things. And I think it's a benefit to the scene in that way.
Thank you. And that's really what we were going for. I mean, as I was saying, we had about 130 topics, and we kind of had to figure out, are we going to want to have a chapter for every New Year's prank? Or do we want to group them? Do we want to have one for each festival? Because right there, if we did every prank in every festival, that's about 20 chapters gone.
Yeah.
So we kind of had to figure out how to approach what are the 100 key things to know. How do you organize that? I'd say at the beginning of the book, we really did try to focus on the most important information, and then we divvied them up and kind of wrote them on our own. So we have different chapters. Like I said earlier, he really wanted to focus a lot on kind of the community, the scene, the lot scene, and I wanted the history. And we obviously we crossed those lines. It wasn't that we were isolated on those subjects, but it allowed us to kind of divvy up what we really wanted to focus on, and then kind of write our own little chapters on each one. And then we shared and we kind of gave each other feedback. But you could hopefully hear both of our voices distinctly in here, because it is meant to be, different chapters, different writer.
Phish began 2017 with 3 shows at Barcelo Maya in Mexico. And then ahead of the Baker's Dozen, they played 3 nights at Northerly Island in Chicago, a show in Dayton, one in Pittsburgh, and then the Dozen. After the Baker's Dozen, they played Dick's for the traditional Labor Day weekend, and then they just returned back to Madison Square Garden for the 4 nights at MSG. I believe the press release was their long-awaited return to Madison Square Garden. But for all intents and purposes, 2017 is the Baker's Dozen, right? I mean, it kind of blots out the sun when you talk about that year and Phish.
It was an achievement that really rivaled only by Big Cypress, was probably one of the 2 greatest things that they've ever achieved. And I look at like Cypress as sort of the Herculean, singular, dusk to dawn, like the strength, the fortitude to get through that singular event has been unsurpassed. And then almost, 20 years later, 17 years later, instead of trying to do something like that in a singular time, doing it over the course of multiple weeks and not repeating any. And it was just sort of really just this moment in time where Phish was, the musical worlds, their eyes were on Phish. I mean, Metallica was talking about Phish.
Yeah.
So it's hard to talk about all the other things that were going on because this was historic beyond just the Phish scene. The music world took note, and obviously, and it was a moment of pride on so many levels for them, for us. I mean, it was Phish Day. Like literally what we are talking about today was New York City declared Phish Day. So yeah, it makes sense that 2017 was the Baker's Dozen.
Yeah,
it earned it. And it just, I wound up going to the final 8. So that was what wound up happening. And again, my wife was so kind to allow me to do that.
Sure.
But yeah, no, the wheels were turning, and I just, collaborating with everyone, how we getting tickets, who's approaching what. And the ticket situation was really interesting because initially tickets were really easy. And I think it was the jam night. All of a sudden the jam night happened. Word got out that history was happening, that the band was, really pushing it on all cylinders. And tickets went from being, I know friends who just got free tickets or, traded for like a sticker, to being, friends were getting shut out and like $300 being asked on the lot. Like it was crazy how that all shifted. And people were really trying to get in. I know people that just dropped everything and flew out, having no plans, and were like, I need to see something here. It was just interesting to see how that all shifted, and a couple concerts that specifically started with a jam night. All of a sudden, all eyes were on the Garden.
Yeah, I remember that was the turning point, because I remember getting on the train after the show. I'd go straight downstairs to Penn Station, find the train, hop right on it, and I would be on my phone immediately, because by the time the train took off to go home, they would announce the theme for the next night or the next show. And that Sunday, I don't remember which one it was, but it was after my first show was the Red Velvet night. And then I think the jam night was the next Tuesday, the following Tuesday.
I think it was on Tuesday. Okay. I don't know if it was the next Tuesday, but I believe right. It was.
And when I saw jam night, and I said to myself, thank God I have tickets to this already, because I knew when Phish says explicitly that they're going to jam, that demands attention. And after that, you're 100% right. It turned everything on its head.
Yeah, I mean, they had Jimmy night, and everyone's like, all right, we're getting a harpoon. Like, when do we get that broadcast? Right, people, like, you got a heads up. You never get a heads up, but we did here.
And a few random scattered thoughts about the Baker's Dozen, and then we'll move on to this show specifically. I agree with you that it's kind of the career-defining event up to that point. I agree it's on par with Big Cypress in almost every way, but just in a different avenue. I kind of agree with you there. I saw Big Cypress as kind of like a 3-hour Martin Scorsese movie, but the Baker's Dozen was like a Ken Burns documentary. It was like, multiple hours, several parts. You get to approach it from every angle. It could be serious. It could be entertaining. It's their whole career summed up in one
depth.
event.
Super
lots of depth. So set one opens with Dog Stole Things. And when I was listening on this recording on Phish.in, I realized, we went crazy when the lights went down, but the whole audience is quiet. You could hear a pin drop right before they played Dog Stole Things, and I realized how relaxed we were at that point.
I see this show as like almost like a ticker tape parade for a championship or a victory lap, or like it was just every single moment, every pause in a song was a celebration of what they achieved, and they weren't even done achieving it, but we were in this sort of like just this, high fives, hugs. You could see it on their faces. You could see it on our face. I mean, it was incredible. And the reason I chose this show wasn't that it was my favorite of the Baker's Dozen. If I was going strictly by music, I probably, for myself, I love the Double Chocolate. I think that was my favorite night. Attendance bias, being honest, I was at that one. It might have been Jam if I was at that one, but I went to the last day.
That's what the show is for, man.
Exactly. So that's why I've been admitting to, but I would have gone if I was strictly music. But from an emotional standpoint, this was our championship banner being raised to the rafters. And it really was.
Quite literally.
It literally happened.
So after Dogs Stole Things was Rift, which upon re-listen is a little off. You didn't quite hit everything. And then the follow-up of Ha 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 also was pretty botched. But at this point, it was, like you said, it was like a victory lap. It's like if they blow Ha Ha Ha, we're laughing, we're not booing, and we're not rolling our eyes. It was just everyone was in for the whole time. And then Camel Walk is when I sat up and took notice, where it's so calm and funky and relaxed. It was just
patience.
Yeah, very patient.
And go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say there's parts where Fishman especially, he's hitting his snares on, it's almost become stop-start during the song where it never usually is. But it still feels like the whole band is prepared for it. It's like they are not just improvising, but they really are one unit playing something that we've heard all before and has been played hundreds of times before, but it still feels new.
Were so in sync, and it might not have been, it really is about the improv and the jams and sort of that in between notes. I mean, like you said, the riff and the ha ha ha, definitely there were some stumbling points from the composed sections,
right? But
when we got into the points where they could just play music together after having these 13 nights together, it was like one mind. I mean, there was no hesitation. Anytime a jam launched, they could do anything they wanted to. And the Camel Walk, really, I agree. I think that's kind of, the show took a little turn right there. And personally, I do love the Phish funk. Give me the cow funk. So,
yeah.
I think we all just kind of got a little looser too. But yeah, that was definitely where the set sort of, I felt like kind of got its feet under it a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I was grooving on my couch re-listening to this show during Camel Walk. I didn't even realize it, but I was moving my shoulders, which is the most I usually dance anyway. The next song is really what, in my opinion, took things into overdrive. It was the first time that I really got my eyebrows raised, which was Crazy Sometimes, which is not a song that's played very frequently. And there are parts of it song-wise and structure-wise that I think needs to be a little sharpened. But once that jam gets going, I mean, holy crap, this is really something to take notice of.
And Page just like kind of, I mean, there's just like this funky groove that he gets into, and it's spooky. Like it's a perfect Mike Gordon song. You could just, I mean, I feel like it just represents sort of like if you go to a Mike Gordon concert, what you could kind of expect. Mm-hmm. It's just a song that kind of feels that way. It is Crazy Sometimes. And then all of a sudden it shifts from this kind of spooky feel to a funky feel and back again around. But yeah, I mean, again, super patient. I mean, it was just, they take their time, and once they're in that groove, it goes wherever it needs to go, and they were in no rush. And I think the Baker's Dozen just in general there was no rush because they knew they had all the time in the world.
Yeah, and I got that vibe at the first show that I saw, the Red Velvet, when they came on to open, and Fishman had the Bishop's outfit on, and to play the Velvet Underground song Sunday Morning. And they were kind of just grinning at each other and kind of nodding at each other when they came on. And I could remember thinking, this is what a residency feels like. It's not a run. It's not a stand. It's a whole, like they are the residents of the venue. Like they own it in a sense. And Crazy Sometimes has that not laid back vibe, but like you said, a very comfortable vibe. And one theme that Crazy Sometimes kicked off was Page's use of his synthesizer. that I thought brought their whole sound to another level.
Absolutely. I mean, it happened multiple times this night. I feel like he kept going back to that, and it just drove what we were hearing.
Yeah, it's fairly new for Phish, and it suits them very well. After that was I Saw It Again, which the crowd loves, right? It's a crowd favorite.
Yeah. And it goes into that spooky weird thing. I think, these three songs that they're about to talk about, Crazy Sometimes, Saw It Again, and The Sanity That's About to Come. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just a really interesting trio in the middle of the first set. Thinking about, I'm just trying to picture, brand new fan, first show, walk it in, and you get yourself a Sanity, or you get yourself a Saw It Again, and Fishman screaming in the back. It's just kind of the fact that they could just roll through these and just create this pocket of spooky weirdness and just roll out of it. They started with the funk with the camel walk into the weirdness, and then following these comes Bouncing. It's like this, they could do whatever they want. But I found that those three songs somehow fit really well together.
So like you mentioned, Bouncing Around the Room follows it up. It's still a lovely song. And I remember thinking that it's always overplayed, but it isn't. I looked up some stats. It's only played about 5 times a year or so in the last couple of years, Bouncing Around the Room. For someone like you who's been seeing them since '93, that's like a huge difference.
I think it's, just the fact that songs like Rift and Bouncin' were 13 songs into this run of no repeats before they were utilized, just goes to the depth of the catalog. Like, these are staples of the staples. I mean, these are songs that have been with this band for so long. And to not see it to the 13th show, we didn't even know if we would see it. So it's interesting. Right. It is interesting to see that Bouncin' is not as much a guarantee as it once was. I did think it was interesting after all that weirdness, the Sanity with little Saw It Again quotes in it. It's just, and now we're going to go little harmony with the Bouncing Around the Room, the sing-along. And it fit perfectly.
Yeah. And how you brought up that it's 13 shows in, how many bands would have to be digging so deep into their B-sides or D-sides or unreleased, like songs that you've never heard before? And Phish, it's like, oh yeah, the biggest song we had that we probably played 25 times a year in 1994. Now you might or might not hear it. It really speaks to them.
It might be one of the songs. I mean, when we talk about the spread of people following and finding Phish, for those early years, Bouncin' probably was the song that got a lot of people first hooked in the band.
Yeah, and then they followed that up with a debut. Again, 13 songs in. Now here's one you've never heard live before from us, right? It was a Vita Blues song. Most events aren't planned. This is my favorite performance of the first set, just from a musical standpoint especially. I like that it gives Page the spotlight big time, and it was just, the groove is so sick. Fishman hitting that hi-hat, and I think it's Gordon's bass, just that little rumble that's just repetitive over and over again, almost in the same way that Sand or First Tube would be, with just a bass and drums kind of set up. Page's sweet vocals, and then all of a sudden, at I think it's about 4.5 minutes in, it just picks up, and they go into overdrive.
it's amazing to think that a band, the first time they play a song live, could hit that gear as seamlessly and as comfortably as they did. Because I mean, I saw Vita Blue once. Maybe I saw this live. I don't know that I did, but it felt like a new tune to me. It wasn't something that I was readily pulling out of the memory banks, and it just felt like pure Phish. And it was. I mean, from a jamming standpoint, from all four of them on stage together, it definitely was the highlight of the first set. I have my own personal highlight coming up that I'm going to talk about a little bit, but as far as musically, and as far as them as a four-piece, this was the big jam of the set for sure. I mean, just in general, seeing, in recent years, Mike has really been bringing forward a lot more of his material that's been making it in the rounds, and it's nice seeing Page doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think I just appreciate the fact that I like seeing them having the side projects and then bringing in the things that they play around with there into the Phish world. And so just seeing, Page doing that, I thought was terrific.
Yeah, especially when it's as successful as this. After that is Bug and I've Been Around, which are both fine songs, just standard first set songs. And then what was one of your most emotional times of the set. Tell us a little bit about Isabella.
So I could tell you, I'll tell you a lot of things about Isabella. Please, so for me, this is the song I most wanted to hear during the Baker's Dozen. It's my daughter's name. During the Baker's Dozen was my 200th show, and anyone that was listening at any given time, when I was celebrating that, leading up to the show, at the show, all I was saying, I just want to throw it out there to the world. Isabella, that's all I want. That's all I need. And it just was something that I didn't know that I would hear again. I was at the MSG show in 97, 12/30/97 when they played it. And I hadn't heard it since. I know they hadn't played it since 98, but for me, it had been, a full 20 years. My daughter's named Isabella with the Z, not the S, just to make sure we're all clear. The Isabella has the Z.
For those who make birthday cards, make sure you spell it.
Yeah, no, it's Z Isabella. Where I was standing, I saw I've Been Around End, and Trey picked up a different guitar, and it didn't register to me anything was specifically happening. When he kicked into the riff, I have never had an outpouring of emotion and tears of joy like I had at that moment. I mean, it was nonstop. It was all over my face, and I was just so incredibly happy and overwhelmed with joy. It's a moment I'm never going to forget for my life. And what is actually one of the reasons why I chose this show was thinking that after the show, I was in this spot kind of behind the stage, and there was a couple, maybe 2 rows in front of me. They turned around. I was so happy. I just had to give them a hug and tell them. They then turn around and tell me, well, the day before, Phish played Joy, which is their daughter's name, and that's the first time they've heard it. And they had the exact same reaction that I had yesterday, and we just had this group hug, and it was like, this is Phish magic. I mean, we all have our own personal stories of where those magical moments happen. That was like, how does the universe hear this? How did this happen? But just at that moment, at that space, it was that space for me and them, and it was just such an incredible thing that I will never forget it. And I still try to relate it to my daughter and explain it to her, and I'll play it for her, and I'm like, this is your song. One day she'll get it, maybe. Yeah. But I just try. She's like, what do you mean you were crying? I'm like, I'm just telling you, just joy, just pure joy. And it was, I mean, musically, it was just on fire. I mean, the energy in that place, the place erupted. It's been something that fans in general have just been wanting to hear near the top of the list. And there was a lot of Hendrix played over the course of the 13. So I thought there wasn't a chance at this point. I was like, they've honored all different kinds of musicians throughout the 13. I thought maybe there was, it just wouldn't happen, but that's okay. And it caught me off guard and blew me away, and just one of probably the greatest musical moments of my life.
So when set 2 began, it became kind of a game of what's left. We were down to the final frame. It was where 12 and a half shows in, they've played so much, but those of us who are stat heads or get really into set list games, what are the most common that haven't been played? And I think You Enjoy Myself stood out, and it will come in a little bit, but this was a fairly short set in terms of numbers of songs because of the opener, because of this monster Simple that ate up so much time, and it was so quality that almost in real time, you could feel the vibe that people were understanding. This is the Baker's Dozen simple, capital B, capital D, capital S, that it's now kind of assumed this stature seconds after they stopped playing it.
There were so many layers to that simple and so many sections, and just, as you said, it's just so quality. It was just such a standout version. And I feel like anytime they play simple in Madison Square Garden, it just makes all the sense in the world. I mean, we are in a skyscraper.
Right.
I remember, I don't know if we're 5 or 7 floors off the ground, but for anyone that's not been there, we are off the ground. The venue is not on ground level. So we're in a skyscraper, and maybe not scraping the sky, at least in New York terms, but for where I live in Portland, it would be a skyscraper.
Yeah.
But it's just, like it's, as far as a song and a place and a time, it just made so much sense. And just the jam itself, Simple is one of those songs for me, I never necessarily go crazy when they start it, but so often when they end it, I'm just so blown away of where they came, because it is such a flexible song. And so I always feel there's just certain songs like that where I'm like, let's see what they do. And I just wind up being completely floored by just how dynamic a song it is and how flexible it is for whatever they're feeling. And that simple, I mean, is 25 and a half minutes. It was kind of like, as it ended, we all kind of looked around at each other like, all right, we all need to regroup. The band we all just need a second to kind of take a breath here, because that was just its own musical journey and just so deep.
Yeah, and there's so much within it. It's like Cubist almost. It's like you look at it from one angle and then there's something new to discover, where it's around 8.5 minutes. It starts to get space funky, and then Page brings the synth back about a minute later. They fall into a groove at 11 minutes that I wish they could stay in forever. Repetitive goodness is what I wrote in my notes. Repetitive goodness. I wrote Pages on his synthesizer, or maybe his theremin. Phish.net notes that he was on a theremin, but my ears can't really tell the difference.
I watched the video just in prepping for this, because there's a really quality video that Phish put up. And I think it's the theremin at the end. I don't know if at that moment it was. I think as they kind of fade out, he uses the theremin. And I thought, and I don't know if we're talking about the same time, but there was kind of almost an under pressure groove. And I think maybe that might be right around that same time that you were kind of describing, where it's just this rolling, funky, just the pocket. I mean, they were just in the pocket, and, we swore away.
And then toward the end of it, I'll say the three quarters of the way into it, around 18 minutes, you could feel it moving toward a peak. Like, I think Trey is mostly directing it. to me, it was almost like they were saying, we're all so deep into this event. Like we've been here, we're so deep into it. We're neck high into the Baker's Dozen, but we're just going to kill it one more time to make sure we all remember this.
And I think this was the glaze. There wasn't any overt glaze reference, but I think this was it. We are going to glaze you with this jam. Your eyes are going to roll back, and you're all going to be just completely floored by the glaze that we're giving you. We're done. You're done. That's it. Yeah, everything else is candy. If you do watch the jam again, you'll see Kuroda's lights just with the peak. It's just an explosion of energy. And because this is the victory lap of the Baker's Dozen, it wasn't just the moment of the music, which was so incredible. It was the achievement of a lifetime. But it was all in one. And here with the simple, you could feel it, and a couple other times during the set in the encore, you could feel it. Like this was a celebration beyond the moment. And the simple jam really stood out as just one of these. I mean, it is a capstone. I mean, I think that's completely accurate.
And the follow-up was Rise, Come Together, which I think was a needed breather. I think everyone went to the bathroom during this, and that's not necessarily a statement of the song. Just, it's almost a thankless task, whatever song it was, to follow up that simple.
It was almost like, that's what we need right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe we didn't know it at the time, but we definitely need it right now. So I was happy that it was there. It also, I don't think they could have come back with another huge jam at that moment.
Yeah.
They kind of had to give us a little bit of a deglazing before kind of taking back off the ebb and flow of the set.
And then more flow when they played Starman by David Bowie, which was the only time that they played it outside of the Ziggy Stardust set. To me, I love whenever they play any Bowie, this Life on Mars. They're so good at covering him. And it was just, I can't think of a more perfect line to kick off a chorus, or to end a chorus in this case, is "Let the Children Boogie" at a Phish show.
There we were.
Yeah.
Hazy cosmic jive. I mean, it was perfect. It was beautiful. Again, a reset on everything before sort of the final launch for the end of the night and the end of the run. And it's just such a classic song that, even if you were, at your first show, you were fully brought into that moment. It was a tearjerker for a lot of people.
It's hard not to like. And then to what I thought was going to close the set was what had to happen. It almost felt like it was inevitable, was You Enjoy Myself, right? It's the Phish song. And there was a huge crowd cheer when they opened it. And they were just putting their stamp on Madison Square Garden.
And again, it's beyond just that show. It is a celebration of what had just been achieved, 30 plus years. You could almost hear it in the recordings. It's just how much love was being sent to the band, and they felt it. I mean, it was, and you could hear it in the encore later. I mean, the band was tearing up during the parts of this show as well. So, but that yam and the buildup and just the energy with the crowd was just something that you don't always get. Not that crowds aren't excited for Yem, they always are. But there was more being cheered about here than just the Yem itself.
And there was more at the end of this You Enjoy Myself than what's usually there, because I don't usually care for the vocal jam very much, but they were teasing other songs that were played earlier in the run. So I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure someone was singing Everything in Its Right Place, the Radiohead song. Someone was doing the Lizards chorus or the coda at the end. And there was another one or two. And it's like,
we got another Isabella. I can tell you,
that's right.
Which for me, again, I couldn't have been happier.
Right. It didn't happen.
Was not enough. Keep it coming.
Right. It didn't happen for 20 years, and now it's happening twice in a night.
Yeah. I think in realistically, I think Mike kind of started it on the bass, and then you could hear kind of Trey pick it up a little bit afterwards, and then they went into it. But yeah, I mean, it's just, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the 97, the 12/30/97 Sneak and Sally, where it was like, if you didn't catch the opener Sneak and Sally for the bust out, here it is again in the encore, just in case you missed it.
And to wrap it up, I was 100% sure that You Enjoy Myself was going to close the set. It just from an artistic perspective, I thought it made sense, but they're not done yet. They play Loving Cup, which is like a raucous version. And like, what did you think? Were you exhausted by this point?
I don't know that I was exhausted. I think I was shocked though also. I think I was exhausted afterwards. I don't know that I was exhausted at the moment, but it's also just it's usually an encore or set closer, more encore than set closer, but usually is sort of that capstone. And there was so much honoring of the bands, the influences, that I could see how it would fit in.
And I remember the break before the encore being a little bit longer than usual. Mm-hmm. We were waiting for a while, everyone was so thrilled. And then when they came back on, it made a lot of sense. Why? Because the staff or the crew was setting up that banner to be raised. And it took a while for them to do it. And once I think we all realized what was happening, I thought it was just going to be a photo op, like the band in front of it. But then when I saw it dangling from those ropes in front of the stage, it was like the impossible made possible. Like this band that couldn't sell out a bar outside of Burlington in 1990 now still does have their name hanging at the top of Trademark, the world's most famous arena. And that's when I got emotional.
Achievement. I mean, it is for them to have pulled off what they pulled off and to be honored in the way that they were. I can't speak for them, but between the raising of the banner and the proclamation by the mayor of New York City that this day was Phish Day officially, it just was such an incredible feat that it just brings just an emotional feel. I mean, it's just, I don't know how you can't just be proud of what these guys have accomplished, and to do it at Madison Square Garden. I mean, I've thought about this for a while. Like it's been amazing to me how this band that not everyone in the general public is very familiar with, but if you live in New York, how do you not notice that the same band plays Madison Square Garden on New Year's every night? Or, you'd figure at some point you'd be like, how does this band that I barely know or I've only heard of in passing get this coveted slot? And it's just the years of the grind and the playing and the growing. And it's just such an incredible feat. And the banner itself was just, you could see it on their faces.
I'm glad you brought it back to that, because my father worked with the Madison Square Garden network. He was very fortunate, and I was, as a result of getting a lot of tickets to games in the Skybox, which is like the luxury box is up high up at Madison Square Garden, and it's up high, but you are right on site level with all of the banners. So when we were up there as a little kid, like 8 or 9 or 10 years old, I would try to memorize the names and, which years the Knicks won the Atlantic Division and the Rangers won this. And so I felt literally physically close to the banners, but also it was one of those things, like it feels personal to me. And then they played the only song that could have been played, but it was not obvious to me, and I don't know anyone who could have called it, was Willie Nelson's On the Road Again.
Yeah, that came out of nowhere, but I felt like it was the band just telling us how good things were amongst them. Like there's just nothing better than playing music with my friends that I love. I mean, that's, and they're getting choked up. There couldn't have been a more appropriate song for them, just sort of like, hey, everyone, we love each other. We love you. Look at what we've all done together. And the joy that we have when we do this is real. It's not an act. It's not, they could have played anything, but they wanted to make sure that message that we are best of friends. Here we are. Can't wait to do it again.
And not to be ignored, the line where they sing, insisting that the world keeps spinning our way. They've kind of done that their whole career. In the early 90s, they may have kind of flirted with, being signed by Elektra and making Hoist, which is kind of a commercial album, commercially accessible, and it didn't work. And everything they've done, they've kind of done on their own terms.
Yeah, and there was also, before the Tweezer reprise, there was a little bit of a Weekapaw solo because people were saying, like, Mike forgot to do the solo. I think they transitioned out of the Sneak and Sally. I think it was the Holes night, out of the Sneak and Sally into the Weekapaw, and it was smooth, but Mike never got his solo. So they're like, okay, we're gonna go back to everything, and we're just gonna put a perfect bow on all the loose ends. I thought the lawn, for me, missing the actual Lawn Boy was nice to kind of get a little, just a taste. I got a little taste of the Lawn Boy, so that was really nice. And the reprise, I mean, like, what else could end this entire run except this sandwich over the course of the 13 nights? I think the Tweezer was the first night.
I think so.
And it's actually, and it actually, on the New York proclamation of Phish Day, it says awaiting the reprise. Like, it's
Does
on,
it really?
it's written. Yeah, it's written in that official document from New York City. So I don't know who is involved in all of that, but I think that that's a pretty amazing thing that, like, even New York was in on the gag, like the whole city.
So, Jason, to wrap it all up, thank you so much for being here. I loved talking about this show with you. Obviously, we probably could have gone on for hours more if we really tried to chase down every thread of this conversation. Before we end things here, again, where can we find your book?
You can find it online, Amazon. It's in bookstores too, if those still exist by you. The Barnes and Nobles of the world does carry it. But yeah, just go into Amazon, and it's readily available and ready to ship.
So again, it's 100 Things Phish Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die by Jason Gershuny, and Andy Smith. Any last thoughts, Jason, before we sign off here?
No, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I love talking Phish, and it was great talking Phish with you, Brian.
Wow, that was a lot to go over. As you can probably tell, Jason and I had a lot to say and a lot to share about this night. Needless to say, we're both going to remember it for a very long time, and we could have discussed this for hours on end, but we had to end at some point. And before we say goodbye here, though, it's time for the attendance bias fact check. At the beginning of the episode, Jason and I traded stories about the wetlands, and I tried to set the scene for some listeners who may not know about that venue. The Wetlands was a small venue and an activist center located in the Tribeca neighborhood of New York City. It opened in 1989 and closed in 2001. Larry Block opened the venue and Pete Shapiro took over in 1997. The club had a capacity of about 500 people, which was really pushing it during a sold-out show. You were elbow to elbow. And it hosted some of the greatest bands of its time, including Phish, Moe, Dave Matthews, and several others. If you're interested in learning more about it, there is a very good documentary called The Wetlands Preserved, available on YouTube. Jason mentions that his first Phish show was at the Orange County Fairgrounds in 1993. The show date was July 21st, 1993. It was one long set as part of the Horde tour, and it featured a very short 2001 opener, a big ball jam, Purple Rain, and a very interesting Runaway Jim that I would highly recommend you check out. There's an excellent recording of it on Phish.in. It's not quite a soundboard, but it sounds pretty darn close. He also mentions the 1994 Phish show at the Onondaga War Memorial Auditorium near Syracuse. That show date was November 4th, 1994, and that was a full two-set show. That show has lots of peaks and favorites, or at least my favorites, from that time period, including a very solid David Bowie, which we all know was at its height during 1994, a Colonel Forbins into Mike's Tila Weekapog, and a very offbeat jam in that Weekapog groove. Another stellar DAT recording is on Phish.in. And finally, one more show that Jason mentioned. The show at Auburn Hills in 1995 was on October 28th, 1995, during the band's excessive and fabled 1995 fall tour. Jason mentions that during the Baker's Dozen, Metallica was talking about Phish in that the whole music industry was aware of the residency. That is in reference to a short video of Metallica that surfaced during a practice session of theirs in August 2017. They talked about being jammy, quote-unquote jammy, for 30 seconds during one of their songs. They referred to themselves as Phish, very sarcastically. Drummer Lars Ulrich then informs the rest of the band that Phish had just completed a residency called the Baker's Dozen. They all kind of stand in stunned silence when they're told that Phish didn't repeat a song before James Hetfield sarcastically, but at least I detected some admiration. He says, "Only 13 shows?" So there's some love there from Metallica to Phish, to unlikely sources. Jason and I forgot the order of the Baker's Dozen shows, but it turns out that we were right. The Jam Night show was indeed the next show on a Tuesday after the Red Velvet night. The Red Velvet show was on Sunday, July 23rd, and Jam Night was on Tuesday, July 25th. Toward the end of the episode, we talk about when Phish played Tweezer during the Baker's Dozen. Jason guessed that it was played on night one, and he was absolutely right. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. I would like to thank Jason Gershuny for coming on today. His book, co-authored with Andy Smith, is called 100 Things Phish Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. It's available on Amazon and any bookstores. I would also like to thank Phish.net and Phish.in for everything they always provide. And if you enjoy Attendance Bias, you can support the show by leaving a rating and a review at your favorite podcast app of choice. If that's too much work, then please just tell one other person about the show. Text them, talk, or any other way. Just spread the word. If you tell one other person, that'd be great enough. And thank you again for listening, and see you next time on Attendance Bias.